Welcome everyone to another episode of Kiwi Talks. I'm honored to be speaking to game composer, the man who worked for LucasArts. He's worked on Grim Fandango, Plants and Zombies, Sly Cooper, of course, Psychonauts and Psychonauts 2. He is the only one, Peter McConnell. How you doing?
Great, Reese. Thanks for having me.
I am gutted you're not wearing your legendary fedora. I must say that.
Oh, it's on account of the headphones. What can I say? Otherwise, I would have. So I'm sorry about that.
That's all right.
I've got a
Was it?
I've got a camping hat I can wear over a camping hat, but it doesn't quite work with the headphones.
Not quite the same.
Anyway,
Not quite the same.
Go ahead.
Anyway,
No.
Well, I think the best place to start off is obviously with Psychonauts and Psychonauts 2. How did you come up with the idea of the musical palette for it?
Well, so back in 2000, really when Tim had left LucasArts, and that was just really shortly before I left. I guess when the time we're actually talking was after I left, because that's when I started. So right away, really started working on Double Fine's first game, pretty much as soon as they were founded, and I was a free agent. And in those days, this was just really at the height of the .com craze, and everybody and his brother had a startup somewhere in San Francisco,
Right.
and Tim Schafer's startup was literally in a garage south of Market. So you went in this alley, and then there was this sort of industrial alley with sort of the backs of buildings, you might say, and there was a great big garage door that looked like the garage door in Full Throttle, if you remember or familiar with that puzzle, right? Well, it looked remarkably like that. And if you worked at Double Fine, you had that garage door open, then you parked in this indoor area, and then you climbed up a ladder to a loft to your desk. And so literally everybody was working in their own exhaust. That's how it was in the beginning for Double Fine. And it was really a bootstrapping kind of situation. And in fact, I was told recently that one of the employees had a particularly problematic car exhaust-wise, and he would get a lot of grief every time he would pull in, because then the whole garage would fill up and everybody was gagging while they were. So the point is, everything started under pretty humble circumstances, and this is perhaps a roundabout way of answering your question, but I wanted to kind of lay the groundwork for what was the context of coming up with the score. And I worked out of my little cottage in Berkeley, that's up in the Berkeley Hills, and a little one-room cottage/studio. And so when everything that I did for Psychonauts 1 was written and recorded in that little cottage, some of which would have been to the chagrin of the neighbors. So pretty much in every big project that Tim Schafer and I have done together, there's been a period early on where he will give me some kind of aesthetic guidance, some kind of inspiration, right? For Brutal Legend, it was his favorite collection of metal tunes, right? And for Grim Fandango, it was these kind of rare vinyl records of Mexican folk music that his brother had brought back from Mexico. Also his collection of film noir of Humphrey Bogart films, which I took forever to return to him, much to his chagrin. But there's always this period where you do your research, and in the case of working with Tim, he would give me something to kind of chew on as I'm coming up with themes and sort of a direction for the score. So for Psychonauts, the main thing that he gave me was a collection of Roma music from Transylvania, Moldavia, various parts of Eastern Europe where there are Roma communities, and this particular CD happened to be on Johnny Depp's Rolling Stone playing list at the time, or something. I forgot how Johnny Depp somehow figured into the Tim finding this CD, I believe, but. And I listened to that quite a bit, and that Psychonauts it's a very eclectic score style-wise, because what could be more varied than the human brain, right? So I really kind of didn't have been unapologetic about just borrowing from any and every possible genre to create the music. But this one particular influence was kind of, it may not permeate the entire score, but it's very important to understand Raz. And so Raz's family music that you hear in Psychonauts 2 comes from a little dream that Raz had in Psychonauts 1 that was just ever so subtly influenced by this Roma music that I'm talking about. And also there's a piece called The Meat Circus in Psychonauts 1, which reappears in Psychonauts 2 as the Flea Circus. And that's very much sort of influenced, at least to some degree, by this Roma music that I listened to. So anyway, there was a period during which I was coming up with stuff for Psychonauts 1, themes, melodies, and the way I like to work, if I'm able to do so, if I have the luxury of doing so, and for some of these bigger projects, I have been able to do this. The way I like to work is just to focus on melodies in the beginning. So in those days, I still had a handheld cassette player. So we're talking 2000, Psychonauts 1 days. And I would hum into the cassette. I also used that same cassette player in the Grim Fandango. And I would hum into the cassette. I just play on the piano. I'm a terrible piano player. That's a long story. But I would play on the piano and hum the tune. I figure if it's going to pass that test, like Tim likes it, in that rendition, then we're going to be pretty solid going forward. So I went through a sort of a stage where I was introduced to the Psychonauts characters mostly through concept art, and I always look at the concept art early on in a project, backgrounds and characters, and I try to come up with themes for the backgrounds and the characters, and this is I'm sure a lot of your listeners are aware of this, maybe some aren't, that game music, the way you handle themes and represent characters and places and ideas, it comes from the movie tradition, which in turn comes from the opera tradition. And some movies you just have like some kind of a score, and that doesn't necessarily go into this kind of detail. But a lot of the movie scores that I'm particularly fond of, like the John Williams Star Wars music, or anything by Ennio Morricone, or Jerry Goldsmith, or any of the classic composers. They very much are informed by this 19th century tradition of what's called a leitmotif, a theme that comes back, and it can be very small and short, but just a little melodic fragment that lets you know that, say, the Force is being used in the Star Wars movies, for example. And so for Psychonauts, that's how I like to work. So in the beginning, I basically was humming these themes that were going to be the sort of the skeletons on which the flesh of the score. Gosh, I'm starting to sound like a zombie movie here.
It's right.
When lost in the sea of metaphor, sometimes it's great to reach for the lifeboat of anyway. So I would just hum these very simple, basic versions of the themes into this handheld cassette player, which I would then in 2000 MP3s were brand new, and I was able to actually send MP3s over on the internet to San Francisco so Tim could listen to them. This was a new thing in those days. It's like, wow, we're communicating, we're shipping stuff over our computers. How cool is that? So and all of those, and pretty much, well, any character which is in Psychonauts 1 and returns in Psychonauts 2 has a little touch of his or her theme from Psychonauts 1. And that is so Psychonauts 2 was very much sort of the beginning for me of all these of the story, musical story that got continued in Psychonauts 2. Wait, did I say that right? Psychonauts 1.
Psychonauts 1, yeah.
Yeah,
I know what you mean.
You know what
I know
I
what you
mean,
mean.
yeah.
It's okay. Yeah.
So a lot of this, a lot of what's happening in the Psychonauts 2 story is really a way to finally explore all the material that really just got started on and touched on in Psychonauts 1, since we had fewer resources to work with. And it was less music. It was, an hour and change of music or something. And with Psychonauts 2, it's 3 hours of music. It's a lot of music. So I was really able to explore, really in depth what had just been sort of started in Psychonauts 1.
Given the amount of times you've worked with Tim Schafer, has it gotten to the point that if he does a game, it's just, and he's like, well, who should I get to compose? Oh, Peter. Is it gotten to the point where you'll just do anything with him?
I hope I work on I've worked on every Tim Schafer game so far, and going back to Day of the Tentacle, which he was one of the writers on.
Yeah.
And maybe he might have even been a writer on Monkey too. I'm not sure. I can't remember now. But I sure hope that I work on every single one. That's, knock on wood. I love working with Tim, and it's a great privilege and an honor to work with someone who's that talented and gifted when it comes to story writing and game design.
Is there something specific about him that you like working with him over? What's the unique quality that he has?
Well, being great. I don't know. Tim.
But you're great too. So
I have a great admiration for Tim. He's a wonderful leader, I think, and it's really, really hard to survive as a independent maker of games.
Yeah.
And and he did, and not only did he survive, but with a tremendous amount of loyalty from his employees. Double Fine's a very special company, and it's because of him. So what is it like to work with him? Well, I think he leads by example more than by directive, and he really encourages creative participation from all corners. Now, I say this as not as someone who's ever been employed by him. I've always worked for him as a independent composer.
Yeah.
But you hang around a company long enough, and you get a sense of what the culture is, and that's a very special place. And Tim's role is it's like he commands a lot of respect, and yet he's got a very sort of low key way of running things, and that sort of, my experience as a composer, he will give me the influences that I mentioned earlier, and then pretty much I run with it. And once we've talked about the general direction, honestly, there's very little direct involvement that Tim has. I mean, we'll talk about music, we'll talk about the philosophy of the score, but in terms of day to day, fix this kind of thing, that's pretty rare. And in 3 hours of Psychonauts music, I'm hard pressed at the moment to think of a note that came from Tim about how to change something. Now, I did get feedback from the team on, because it's a very collaborative process. So, and my feeling about that always is, well, these guys know the game better than you, so you got to listen to them.
Is that something that you've learned over time? Because my experience is creatives, we can sometimes be quite sensitive to constructive criticism.
Yeah, I'd love to say I have thick skin, and I know that's a lie. So I really try to keep, I really do try to keep that out of it, because I've been doing this for 30 years plus now, and in all that time, I don't think I've ever been asked to make a change by anybody on any project, where after the change was made, I didn't go, you know what, they were right. I'm glad we did that.
That's good, though. It's a good quality to have.
I always feel like I said, that they really, like, I may really chafe sometimes at doing a fix or addressing a note, but literally 100% of the time, I'm glad that I did it. So you have to have humility when you're doing this stuff. I'm proud of my work as a composer. I think I'm good, but that doesn't.
You are good. Come on, man.
But I really try not to let that get in the way of what my role is, which is to bring someone else's creation to life. That's really where I am. That's what the musical score does. It brings the emotion to really someone else's vision. So they are the ones who know that vision, and if they are, good at what they do, and just, I've always been lucky to work with people who seem to be good at what they do, and Double Fine's, like I said, it's just an amazing company. Then I got to trust that those folks are, that they know what's best. And like I said, my experience always has been they didn't, in fact, do know. I'll see it in the scene again. Go, yep, glad we did that. It was a pain, but I'm glad we did that.
Well, that's good, because it obviously, going forward, if you've already got that established model that's worked 100% of the time, then you're less likely to try and criticize it.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, for all you young composers out there, the customer's always right. This is a collaborative art, and so you need to really be channeling what's going on with what you're scoring. You're not just running off and making music out of thin air.
Yeah. Now, something I've always wondered is, because you play guitar and violin, what actually causes more calluses on the fingers?
Oh, geez.
Because I play guitar, and you can end up with cut fingers and all that sort of stuff. But obviously with violin, I've never played a violin, so I don't know if it's as bad, if it's less.
Well, the instrument that probably I cut my fingers on the most was the 5-string banjo, and that was the first instrument that I used to play. Like when I was 13, I used to play it like 3 hours a day. I just really got into that instrument, and I still have and I play some banjo on Psychonauts too. I still play it.
Given
And
the amount of
that
time
I
you've
did used to
worked
play
with
that
Tim
till my
Schafer,
fingers
has
bled.
it gotten to the
So
point
that's
that
the only
if he
instrument I've
does a
actually
game
got to say
and
that.
he's like, well, who should I get to compose?
That stage
Peter.
on.
Yeah. Is it gotten to the point
I
where you'll
would
just
say
do anything with him?
that
For
it's
him?
actually violin that is a little harder on your fingers, but that is because with the guitar you have, depending on how hard you press and so on, you have the frets to help you.
Right.
But it's important, really, also that one of the for people who play any kind of stringed instrument, to really learn exactly how hard to place your fingers down, because you don't want to do it too lightly, but you also don't want to do it too strongly. You want to be as absolutely efficient. You need to find that sweet spot of just the right amount of pressure to get the tone that you want, because that's going to help you move around. If you're very economical with the pressure you use, that's going to help you move around on the instrument a lot.
So how long did it take you to kind of get to that point with the violin?
Oh God! Well, I didn't practice enough, so it's like some years probably. I played violin. I was classically trained and went through the sort of normal high school youth orchestra kind of situation. And in college, I did a little bit of playing on a project, and then I put the instrument down for almost 10 years. Came back to it and learned to improvise, and that changed my life.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah. So, and that's really what, I think of myself as a rock and roll violinist, more than anything. I got a Marshall half stack over there that it doesn't get out very much these days, but I like to improvise at high volume on the instrument. That's what I really like to do.
Is that where you
flourish? And getting back to the eye shrine, that's me playing the electric.
Oh, is it? Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So because the game's changed so much from your time in the 90s working for LucasArts, right? Well, you're probably working within technological constraints with hardware in terms of how you can compose to the big AAA orchestras that you can use now. Mm-hmm. Like, what was the shift? When did it start kind of moving into that sphere, the orchestrated stuff? When did you actually really start working in that space?
Well, I remember, really in the early days of LucasArts, we're like, well, someday we're going to be able to work with orchestras, but it didn't really start to happen in the industry at large. Like Grim Fandango came out in like 98, I think it was. And that was still, that was notable for having live jazz in it. And of course it didn't have, and all the orchestra in that game was originally sampled. But around that time, I think people at other companies started doing live orchestral scores, because by the time I left in 2000, and Clint Bajakian was also one of my colleagues at LucasArts was scoring shortly thereafter, scoring a big Indiana Jones movie with live orchestra. So it really started to shift in the late 90s and early 2000s, where people were using more and more live players, and there were budgets for that sort of thing.
Right. And was it easy for you to kind of just move into that?
Well, I had the benefit of some classical training, but I was pretty determined, actually. The first orchestral recording I just did as a demo on my own dime, and I was just newly married and with a daughter on the way, and I learned she would be a daughter. Anyway, first child on the way, and I had absolutely no work that year. And it was really stunning, and I was involved in a startup with Michael Land, who led the LucasArts sound department, and we were doing a technology startup that was going less than optimally at the time, and so I had pretty much no income, and I needed to support myself by writing music, and I realized at that time that I really wanted to, do orchestral music because first of all, there's more demand for it, and second of all, I just really wanted to do it. So my buddy from L.A., a film composer named Jim Latham, called me up and said, I'm recording some stuff in Prague with this guy who does remote recordings. Do you want to fly down and do some tunes together, do some pieces together with this orchestra in Prague? I was like, absolutely. So then I just, and I had like a week to do it. I wrote these pieces and slaved really, really hard to, get the all the parts right and everything like that, and flew down to LA, and my wife kindly let me put $3,000 on her credit card.
Well, that's generous.
And well, we did have a kid on the way. There was a certain, I guess, maybe she was too trusting. I don't know, but anyway, it all worked out, and that was my first orchestral recording. Was done just to do it for myself, and those pieces, I know actually for a fact that one or two of those pieces, they've never actually been used anywhere, but they did get me gigs. It was a good thing that I did that. It was mostly, just the energy of doing it. It's like, why do you go to the moon? Why do people want to go to the moon? I mean, there are practical reasons, but part of it is just to have a goal.
Yeah.
And so that was my goal, is I wanted to write orchestral music, and I was able to work with a good orchestrator that helped too. A fellow named Jonathan Sachs, who who orchestrated all the Toy Story movies.
That's cool.
So I got some expert help. But ultimately I still had to write the music. So I learned a lot doing that. And, like I said, I had some training from college and studied sort of traditional classical music writing. But I've very much over the years been a learn on the job kind of guy. So that was the beginning of that.
So let's say you have a brass section, you have a string section,
yeah.
You have a pianist there that are all,
Mm-hmm.
they do that stuff all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like say with the London Symphony Orchestra, they'd all work together on the same
Right.
projects, right? That as a team.
Correct.
But let's say you wanted to record an instrument that's not usually within that sphere, like a sitar or a koto.
Okay.
Like some sort of weird Greek instrument of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work into the framework when they're not usually connected to the team that is recording?
Well, Psychonauts 2 is a really good example, because we and some of this we had to do by necessity because of COVID.
Right. Yeah,
because there were very few places in the world where you could actually get an entire orchestra in a room in 2020.
That's true.
And one of the places where you could do this, which was very fortunately for us, since I've had a long-term relationship with them, is Melbourne Symphony. So Melbourne was able to, and it was touch and go because they had very strict rules about how many people could be in the room. So our initial plan was to record the orchestral parts in 3 sections. So you can only get 20 people on the stage at once. So you record pieces of the music. And at the end of the day, we were able to do it in 2 sections. So the entire score was recorded, strings and winds, with a separate set of recordings for brass and percussion.
So,
and
sorry, I was just going to ask, were you present there, or were
no,
you doing
no,
it
no,
via
it's
Zoom?
all done remotely. It's all done using something called Audiomovers. And I think a lot of musicians these days pretty much all over know about Audiomovers, because it's a way that you can record remotely, and it's like being in the studio with people. So I've done last year I did a number of live recordings, and the biggest ones being the ones for Psychonauts, and they were all done using this method. You can basically go into your studio and load up your Pro Tools session, and then you can using basically web links, you can hear what's going on in the other studio in your Pro Tools session. It's like being there. And so for Psychonauts, we literally had musicians from Beijing to Orlando in different sessions being layered. So the Erhu player was in Beijing, a composer, a friend of mine named Seth Sui. The Melbourne Symphony was of course the orchestra, and also the meat of a lot of the jazz pieces, a lot of the winds and brass for some of the jazz pieces was done in Melbourne. Then we had a rhythm section for a lot of the jazz was recorded in Nashville. Some of my friends, basically I tried to work with as many friends that I'd worked with on earlier projects, like Paul Hansen, who played electric bassoon on Psychonauts 2, goes back to Grim Fandango. My friend Hans Christian up in Door County in Wisconsin played the cello. My friend Andy Burton, who's a keyboardist extraordinaire for Little Steven and Cyndi Lauper and folks like that. He played keys in Hoboken, New Jersey. Matt Eckel, flautist, played from Seattle. Ravi Knipstra, bass player, played from LA. All these sessions I listened to in real time and put together, and it was a job putting all that together for 3 hours of music.
I bet it was.
And then we had the rock and roll that we did at Skywalker Ranch. That was with Michael Lynn and Clint Bajakian and a phenomenal keyboard player named Justice Dobrin, who really ran the session, and Eli Hlidzik on drums. Anyway, we a lot of players. It's a lot of live musicians. There's very little music on Psychonauts 2 that isn't live, and if it is, it's like the occasional synth. So really, other than the vibraphone sound and the piano sound, everything else was played in real time by a amazing player.
That's
except
so
for me.
cool.
I played the ones that weren't amazing.
Too humble, man. Too humble. But that sounds like such a mission to do it that way. I mean, obviously, that's just the way it had to be done. And I suppose going forward, that might still be the standard. Even if you can record with an orchestra, there might be instances where that might still be done.
Yeah, it had to be. It had to be done that way. For necessity is the mother of invention. So yeah, it had to be done that way. There were great benefits actually to recording the orchestra in sections, because it allowed us to use the music more. It gave us more options with how to use the music in the gameplay. Sometimes you might want to bring the brass in or not have it in, depending on the situation. For example, that was a really nice. And honestly, it helped just with the mix too, to have that kind of control. I know that on there are other big developers who regularly record orchestras and sections this way for the purposes of interactivity. That is kind of a big budget thing to do, you might say. In this case, it was an absolute requirement.
Okay. Now, back in the 90s when you were at LucasArts, you wore a lot of hats. There were so many different things that you did, right? Compared to, say, now where you just compose. Because usually certain people are given jobs to do. So there'll be someone that does the sound editing and someone that does sound design, and then there'll be someone that does composing. But you were doing a lot of different things at LucasArts. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was the early days, so, I mean, shoot, I even did Yoda's voice. Don't ask me to do it. But
well, I actually was going to ask you about...
And Avril Akbar, too. Yeah.
So how did you come up with the voice? Did you just imitate, like, Frank Oz for ages until you...
Well, I was watching all that Sesame Street, because
right.
in the end of the day, it's Yoda's got a certain amount of Grover and I'm trying to think of who else I hear in him, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but yeah, that was fun. And that was really in the early days where the voice department, had to cut corners.
So they're just like, Peter, jump up.
Yeah, exactly. I died a lot, Nothing in Sector 7. Wow,
But how many takes would you do? Is it just one take and they'll be like, "Yep, Peter, that's great. Next take."
Oh no, you try hard.
Yeah.
Sure you do. I mean, it's like anything else. No, you tried to get it right. Yeah.
Yeah. But like with Yoda, how many renditions of the same take did you have to do?
Gracious, I don't know. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, a long time.
I don't think that many. I just, whatever. I could more or less kind of do it.
Do you kind of miss those days though, where you could do multiple things, where you had your fingers in so many different pies?
I mean, it was fun, but honestly, I just like writing music. So I'm just happy to be a composer these days, and I like. I mean, I was singing before I could talk, and that's what really, moves me, is just doing music. So yeah, I mean, once in a while I thought, it'd be fun to do some voice acting or something like that. And of course, that's one of those things you got to work really hard at. You got to take acting classes, and it's a whole thing, right? But yeah, for me, I just like to focus on the music.
I heard a story that you, because of that metal version of Imperial March that you did, you got a call to go to Skywalker Ranch to answer for your crimes, so to speak.
I did, yes.
That would have been quite daunting. A lot of anxiety.
It was fine. I was just called by the senior executive of the company, George's right-hand man at the time. And it was more, it wasn't so much that John Williams was annoyed as there had been other situations using John Williams music or not using John Williams music when it should have been used that they were dealing with. But, it's, it's totally understandable. It's, those are the crown jewels. That music is the crown jewels of Lucasfilm. So they got to be pretty serious about it.
I would actually think that composing in that realm would be harder than composing normally, because you have to keep the style in line with John Williams' way of composing. Yeah. So it limits you, and you're kind of almost given like tunnel vision, and you have to keep within certain parameters.
Well, you try to. Yeah, I mean, you try to. Most of what we did at LucasArts in terms of composing, there are only a couple things where, like Dark Forces, TIE Fighter, X-Wing, where we actually composed Indy 4, Indiana Jones, where we actually composed music that was supposed to sound like John Williams, and using the John Williams themes, and we had the benefit of you might say, of not actually having a very high production value. So it was a version for, the Sound Blaster or whatever.
Right.
And so I wouldn't say, I mean, certainly we put high pressure on ourselves to do as good of a job as we possibly could, because we took that music very seriously. I still do take it very seriously, but it was more than anything, it was just great schooling. I mean, to even try in your humblest way to imitate something that's really, iconic like that, you can only learn from it.
Yeah. So do you think it was your time at LucasArts was kind of like a crash course to prepare you for where you are now?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was very lucky, and I was lucky to work with really good friends. The audio department in LucasArts was a very special place, and Michael Land and Clint Pajakian, the two composer colleagues, and it was Michael's department. He really built it. Where, I mean, those are, golden years that we'll always remember fondly in terms of just being a working experience, and a learning experience. It was, I was glad to go out on my own because I do like being able to, work on whatever I can get the gig to work on. I like the art. There's artistic freedom and economic necessity, so fortunately over the years those have lined up nicely. So yeah. I've always enjoyed working on whatever I worked on, and I've had nice, whimsical, well done projects to score.
Well, so, I always have a lot of admiration for someone that gives up their stability, say at LucasArts, to become more of a freelancer, because it's excitingly terrifying because you don't know really what's around the corner in terms of your next paycheck.
It is true. That was it was a scary time for sure. It was also in the air though. I mean, we'd been there for a decade almost. And the new movies had just come out. The Phantom Menace had just come out, and there were a lot of people who were like, okay, well, I've things have kind of run their course for me. I'm ready to do something new, and so there was also a mood in the Bay Area at the time with the whole internet sort of explosion, where everybody was doing a startup or everybody was involved in a startup, and you almost felt like you were missing out if you weren't. And that was exciting as well. All that stuff that was going on, all the new technology and that was coming out, maybe for better or for worse in some cases, but it was an exciting time to be in the Bay Area. And so, for me, it was just, I had to do it. It wasn't even it almost wasn't a choice. I really wanted to go out and, into the big world, you might say.
Yeah. So in terms of your career, is there anything at this point in time you haven't done that you want to do?
There are things I'd like to do better.
There's a brilliant answer.
So yeah, I'm to me, music is something that you can always get better at, and so
life learning.
Yeah, I really look forward to the time when I can, maybe get a little better on the keyboard or whatever, music skills that I'd like to develop, and then apply that to some new project. I'm always thinking about, well, how can, what am I going to learn on, what am I going to do that I haven't done on this thing that I'm working on now. So, and there's always an answer to that. There's always something that I can, that I can do better, or that I can learn to do for the first time.
Yeah. Do you ever get any downtime to do that though? Like if you wanted to improve on keyboard, for example, given I imagine you're always working on projects, probably multiple at the same time, do you ever actually get any downtime to kind of advance your musical skills?
Yeah, not at least not in the last 30 years, no.
Well, I suppose that's a good problem to have, right?
I still have ambitions, you might say. There's also things like work-life balance, right? I mean, I am lucky that I'm really lucky I get to work at home where my kids are, and and that's been a real blessing. Right now, if I had free time on my hands, I'm sure I would do a little bit of keyboard practicing, but I'd probably do a lot of camping as well, so
that's cool.
Well,
that's a good place to wrap up. Thank you so much for taking the time out for doing this. I know how crazy busy you are, so I much appreciate it. So if anyone wants to follow you and see what you're up to and all that, where's the best place for them to do that?
Probably on Twitter. Just probably follow me on Twitter. I try to tweet every so often. At peter.n.mcconnell is my Twitter handle. I've got a Facebook page, an artist Facebook page, and stuff like that as well. And I try to keep those current. And I've got an Instagram account that hasn't been. I'm kind of an old guy. What can I say? I'm not so good with the social media, but
you don't need to be though, right?
I'm like one step up from Cobra Kai. If you've ever seen that show, but anyway, yeah. That's I do try to stay current on Twitter and let folks know what's going on, and there's always stuff going on. So
yeah. Well, Peter, thanks again. I'll let you go. That is the show, everyone. Make sure you share, like, and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe. See you later.
Thanks, Reese. It's been a great pleasure.
Likewise.